Welcome to the Valhalla Filmcast. I am Bryce Thompson. I'm here with Cody Ryrie and a special guest, my wife, Christy Thompson, and our baby, Kennedy Ann Thompson.
Hello.
If you hear screaming and one of us hurriedly jump up and run away, it's because the baby is tired of recording and wants to do something different. But we're going to do... well, I guess you already know what it's called. It's the Beatles movie Help. Christy has been wanting us to talk about this since we started, and Cody's finally taken the time to watch it for the first time. So it'll kind of be someone who is a fanatic of the movie and someone who's seen it for the first time, kind of compare and contrast. So we'll let Christy introduce it, kind of what the movie's about, and go from there.
So this is Help is the Beatles' second feature film. The first one they did was A Hard Day's Night, and it was so huge and popular and such a success that they had to do another one really quickly. So this movie came out in 1965, and it's the one that's in color. So it's we're kind of going backwards here and not starting with their first one and the most popular one, but it's so basically just a little summary of the plot. And it's going to sound kind of silly, but it is kind of silly. So Ringo, the drummer, gets a ring stuck on his finger, and it is a sacrificial ring for some cult. And they have to have this ring so that they can do their sacrifice, their religious sacrifice that they do. And so they're trying to get the ring from Ringo, and because it can't come off his finger, they're trying to cut off his hand and kill him and do all these crazy things. And so lots of silliness occurs.
Yes.
So Cody, what did you think of this movie when you first saw it?
Well, I guess I am not a giant Beatles, I don't know what the word is, because I'm a fan. I like some of the music. And I think that after seeing this, that every film should have at least one Beatles song in it, because it immediately made the movie better. I remember especially the title track. I was watching it, I'm like, kind of what's going on? And the music came on, I was like, oh, I don't care. This is just good. So it was interesting. I was surprised by how funny it was on occasion. It does ride the line between, I feel like a substitute in high school, and all these kids who are, acting out and making skits and whatever else. And then every once in a while, there's something that's almost, ingeniously funny that would kind of pop through. So, and it had a high level of creativity. Silliness is... You have to expect silliness when you watch this, I think. Because it is... They act like they're in high school. I think they're older than that. But I was surprised by how young they all seemed. And I was really surprised because everybody thinks rock band now, and that means and I think the Beatles kind of started this, but screaming women chasing after them. And they're kind of ambivalent about girls and everything in the movie. It's not like they have women around them fawning over them. They're almost too young to be interested in women. It's almost portrayed like they don't care about girls yet, which was really interesting to me because I doubt that was the case in real life at all. But
yeah, no, that was not the case.
It was just really played younger than I thought it would be, because it was my little girl kind of wandered in towards the end, and she sat and watched the whole last half hour because there was so much that was kind of flashy and kinetic. There's a lot of stuff going on in the movie. Something else that surprised me is I guess this was kind of seeing the birth of the music video. Because there's several times, especially the one where they're surrounded by tanks, and there's Stonehenge off in the side. That played a modern music video. That's what it was. Even with the kind of artistic angles they throw in those things. And if I'm correct, that wasn't a thing, right? That nobody did music videos back then.
Yeah, you're correct. Yeah, they it started in their movies, and then that's how it became a thing.
And then I was also interested, it seemed very... Because this is pre-Monty Python. I looked that up, and I was like, oh, did they get this from Monty Python? But no, because it's before Monty Python. And I think Monty Python must have taken a couple cues from the Beatles.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Life of Brian was actually helped funded by George Harrison.
Yeah.
He helped fund it.
They wanted to make it, and they came up with the idea, and George Harrison mortgaged his house so that they could have the money to do it because he loved the Monty Python films so much.
Wow. It
Yeah.
worries me that George Harrison had to mortgage his house to fund anything. Like, you'd think he'd have enough money, like, sitting around, but that's interesting. I was noticed, like, there's that moment when they all go home at the beginning of the film, and they all have separate doors that they walk into the same living room.
They live in the same house, yeah.
And they have that, one sleeps kind of underground, one sleeps over here, and it just... Yeah. And the one guy rolls up some chattering teeth to cut some lawn that's in the house.
Yeah.
Oh, so it was very, very like Monty Python-esque to me. And so I suppose that... Because, in British culture, everything... Well, I've never been there, but from what... The American view I have of British culture is it's very prim and proper and dignified. And Monty Python's always been the explosion of silliness that has to happen when you're that repressed. And it's interesting to see that happened before Monty Python. That you definitely saw that with the guys. They did have amazing chemistry with each other. Like, you could tell they weren't actors. And that's not an insult. You should know that going in. They're not actors. It's not their thing. Yeah. But the thing that made it work is they seemed to genuinely be having a good time throughout the whole movie. Like, you tell they weren't being forced to make this. This was something that they all wanted to do. They all enjoyed doing. And the fact that you threw in a couple of interesting set pieces. Was it a jaguar or a tiger that threatens to eat Ringo at one point?
Yeah, the Bengal tiger. Yeah.
So
they had to sing the symphony to get
right. So there's interesting
random
things thrown in, and the whole thing had the flavor of, hey, we're going to film today, so what should we do? You know, like they hadn't really thought it out. That at the beginning they thought, well, he'll have a ring and we have to get it off him. And like, okay, go. And they didn't know where it was going to go or how it was going to end. When they brought in professional actors, that also helped with the comedy. The guy who played the chief of police, I don't know what his name is. I didn't look it up. He was very funny. He had this kind of, back and forth. And also, the scientist's assistant was in the original Willy Wonka. He played the German guy's dad.
Those two guys. Well, the main scientist guy,
Victor Spinetti. Yeah, he's in all of the Beatles movies.
Oh, okay.
So you'll see him in the Hard Day's Night. He's even in Magical Mystery Tour, which is their weird one.
That's the weird one.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So
you think they're childish in this one?
Yeah. But just to like what you said about like how they work well with each other and stuff. Like if you've ever seen, which you probably haven't because you're new to the Beatles, but if you've ever seen like an interview or anything that they did. Like, that's how they acted. Like, they really weren't acting. They were just talking to each other and, like, acting how they normally act.
Well, especially
they can
John.
never... Yeah, they can... Like, you rarely ever see a time when they sat down and they were serious, all four of them. If they were all in a room together, they were always, making fun of each other and laughing and that kind of stuff. And so, I think that's one of the reasons I really like it, is because... Even though it's this movie that's, completely made up, it feels like the real Beatles to me because that's how they acted. And so it doesn't feel like they were given lines and they had to, it almost feels natural to me. And that's kind of why I like it. And it's their sense of humor carries over. They wrote their own jokes almost, Yeah. They weren't given lines to deliver to be funny. They were just funny because they're funny.
Well, and it seems like if you ever sat them down and tried to have like you were saying, a serious conversation about music or whatever else, it'd been a nightmare. You wouldn't have been able to get anything serious out of them. I think that's where that young kind of energy comes from. They're like I said, they're a really good group of high school friends. And they're having a lot of fun, but good luck trying to get them to finish a test or to do anything serious. And I think that's probably part of the reason they were so popular. And that really comes off on screen when you watch it. And like I said, me being separated from everything, I find it interesting with the movie. There was a booklet with an essay written by Martin Scorsese, and he talks about, and this helped me. I'm glad I read it before I watched it, because he puts it within like the entire framework of the 60s and into the 70s, like film culture, and how it was a really important part for him before he started making movies to see them, or when he was first making movies, and how there needs to be a kind of energy beyond the script and beyond whatever else to make something pop. Because it is true, this movie does work. It worked for me. I don't know if it worked for everybody, but I had fun with it, and it's not because of the plot. It's not because of the locations or anything like that. And no, they do move locations a ton. I mean, they go all over the world, basically, to film stuff. But that's not really why it works. It works because the four of them have chemistry, that indefinable thing. And it's interesting because it doesn't always get caught on camera either. Sometimes, bands can have really good chemistry in concert or on, a record or whatever else, and it doesn't come across on film. But for them, whatever that energy was, it really comes across in the text of a film. Which is why I think when we go back and watch, or I go back and watch Hard Day's Night, I can see now how that would work. Because it was just described as plotless, and you just follow them around, and I'm like, well, that seems like it would be really boring. But now I get it, having seen this one, how that could work full length. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because it's not like, it's a plot in Help, but it's not like this developing plot that's, super exciting.
Yeah.
It's, the same thing kind of over and over again, just a bunch of different ways that they're trying to get the ring and that they're running away from them. And so it's kind of the same thing, over and over again. But like you said, the first time I watched it was before I was really like a Beatles fanatic. I liked them and was kind of new to them. And I didn't get bored. And I didn't know anything about the Beatles really, but I was interested in it, and I liked it a lot. Just the first time I watched it.
Well, what
do you think of it, Bryce?
Yeah, go ahead, Bryce.
Yeah, I think it's not a movie that you're like, yeah, this is an Academy Award-winning picture, because again, it's made by the Beatles, who, it's their music which makes the movie. Which is always why whenever you look up what has the best soundtrack, it's always A Hard Day's Night. Because it's just the Beatles soundtrack. Yeah. It's just the Beatles music. So, of course, it makes sense. But this one, we'll probably talk more about Hard Day's Night. But I think you kind of have to base it off. Since Hard Day's Night is their first movie that they made, and then you look at Help, you can definitely see that, okay, they had fun with Help, and that was their first experience, or with A Hard Day's Night. And then they jump into Help, and they've gone even more into movie making. They kind of have, a plot and a story and characters kind of developing, but it's still the Beatles. They still have, it's still focused on their music, and I think that's why it works, is because they haven't tried to make some really serious movie with serious plot lines. Because John, was he in that movie? I don't remember what it's called. The movie where John acted in the movie.
How I Won the War.
Yeah, and that didn't. What was that before or after Help?
That was after.
Okay, but you can see, because John goes in and he's in that movie, and he doesn't really. It's not like a great performance when he has to act serious, and you're like, this is not good. But when they're just themselves, they're silly, they're just messing around all the time. It's funny. You're seeing the Beatles, and that's what I like. I like it because you can see them being themselves. And when you like a band or you like a person, that's what you want to see. Yeah. Is them, you're seeing them, and that's what it's all about, I think, and what makes it special.
I just think it's interesting that you had to, at least to make it seems like palatable to a 60s audience, you didn't do a documentary about the Beatles. Because that's kind of what would happen now, I think, is you just have a crew follow them around when they play their songs, when they go home, and you'd see them with the girlfriends or whatever else. But they imagine this whole fictional world around the Beatles. Which,
yeah, they don't do that anymore.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. I don't know that anybody did it but them, to be honest. I mean, I could be
it
wrong.
kind of seems kind of weird. Like, if you think about it, like, you think of a band, and you think of them acting in a movie, it's like, it doesn't work. At least not in my mind. Because you're like, well, they're too... It almost seems like everyone else is too serious.
Right.
You know, and that's what makes the Beatles, I think, really good, is that they're really great musicians, but when you, like we've said before, interviews, you can't get, like, a straight answer.
Yeah.
You know, it's all just messing around and just being silly, which is great. You know, they're not just, like, super strict, oh, yeah, and they tell you, like, every note that they know. It's like, no, okay, like, we're going to have fun. This isn't just something to be, you know, taken super serious all the time.
Well, and it seems like because they are so in that vein, to make the rest of the world fit them, they brought the whole world of the film up to that level. So, yeah, they're silly and having a good time. So the architecture's silly and having a good time. And the villains are silly and having a good time. And, you know, it makes the whole thing kind of a piece, which is interesting. One thing I wanted to, excuse me, touch on, though, and I guess nothing exists in a vacuum. And I was aware that after this, the Beatles would break up, and that John Lennon would be shot and killed, and that there's all this, like, kind of melancholy tragedy stuff that's waiting for them down the road. And it can't help but kind of, I don't know, kind of tint the whole thing with these are the good old days, and we'll never see them again. And so,
like a nostalgia kind of thing.
Yeah, and it was not intended for that at all, I don't think. But knowing what we know now about where they were headed, it does give the whole thing a little bit of a sad... You know, at the end, that's what my thought was. I was like, well, that was fun. It's like, yeah, but it wasn't going to last. And
well, they all ended up, at one point or another, they all sued each other and wrote awful songs about each other. John wrote a terrible song about Paul, and Paul wrote a terrible song about John. And so that's totally true. It's like, you know, there's that sad tone to it because you know that it doesn't stay like that at all.
Well, and it reminded me of being in high school and how everything was fun and we just hung out and you didn't care what you were going to do that night or the next day or whatever. And then now, not that life's terrible now, life's not awful now, but, you know, things are not as fun and carefree as an adult as they are as a kid.
It's definitely different.
Yeah.
Like, you can do whatever you want, but it's also you can't do anything because you have to do what you're supposed to, which you can definitely see that. Like we said, this movie is just really fun and carefree in a way, and then once they get to even bigger popularity, they kind of, you can see them kind of fall apart a little.
Yeah, so that's it gave it a little bit of a deeper meaning. It left me thoughtful, which I don't know at the time if that would have done that, if it would have just been kind of a fun romp. But now it was a fun romp with kind of a melancholy, thoughtful conclusion. So yeah, I liked it. I really thought it was interesting, especially to see what everybody was getting so excited about was interesting. And now I finally get what a lot of the excitement back then, and even continuing now. I mean, we just had a documentary on the Beatles that came out last year, I think.
Yeah.
You know, so this popularity hasn't gone away. It's something that's, you know, the Beatles will probably be up there with, like, you know, Da Vinci and Beethoven when it's all said and done.
Right. Well, it's something that has never been done, had never been done before, and has never been done since.
Yeah.
Like, no matter how popular you say a band is or anything like that, they never even come close to the popularity that the Beatles had. Like, it's just... And still have. Mm-hmm. I mean, still making merchandise and selling it, and movies and selling it, and, you know, still getting new fans. That, you know, young new fans, and it's, you know, 50, 60 years later.
Yeah, that's why I said, I don't think they belong next to the Rolling Stones. I think they belong next to, you know, Beethoven, Mozart, whatever. They've reached that level of immortality that I don't know. They may be, you know, 200 years from now, when you're like, oh, that music from that time period, that's the Beatles. That may be.
Yeah.
Just like I don't know all the composers that were around Beethoven, but I know Beethoven. So I think, I think that's where they're at. And having the movie is an interesting way to kind of freeze time around that and see what was going on. So yeah, 2 thumbs up.
Yeah,
I can't wait for Hard Day's Night now. I'm excited for that one.
That's the one that a lot of critics and everybody like more than Help.
Like it more than
it's
Help.
it's a lot more popular.
I want to say Help has a 70 or 70 something on Rotten Tomatoes, and I want to say Hard Day's Night has like a 80 or 90 on Rotten Tomatoes. But
well, we talked
that's
about
an interesting movie to talk about as well.
Roger Ebert put it in his great movies list and talked about the Hard Day's Night and stuff. So
yeah.
A
lot of people have heard of at least A Hard Day's Night, and most people haven't. Unless you know the Beatles, you haven't really heard of Help, and you don't really know that they did a second movie, really, or anything like that. I think it was more directed towards the fans. Help was, and I think A Hard Day's Night was more of like anybody can watch it. You don't have to be a Beatles fan to like it. And Help was kind of more, for the fans. You have to like the Beatles to enjoy it. If you don't like the Beatles, then no, you won't like it.
Cool.
Well, this has been...
I'm glad you didn't have any negative things to say.
Yeah, me too. So.
Just don't watch Magical Mystery Tour.
Well, we might get there. We'll see.
That.
I feel like we should do like a
it's one of
4-part
my
Beatles
favorite.
series now. So
There you go. You have to watch the new documentary that came out, too.
that's a good idea. Yeah.
There's a lot. There's a lot of Beatles stuff. Then we can talk about the anthology and get way deep into it. All right. Well, this has been the Wall of Filmcast. I am Bryce Thompson.
I'm Cody Rowdy.
I'm Christy Thompson.
And I'll talk to you next time.